This is Viva Fry.
I'm Dr. Peter McCullough.
This is Tom Luongo.
This is Chuck Prodnick.
This is Alex Kreiner.
Hey, this is Brad Wall.
This is JP Sears.
Hi, this is Frank Peretti.
This is Tammy Peterson.
This is Danielle Smith.
This is James Lindsay.
Hey, this is Brett Kissel, and you're listening to the Shaun Newman Podcast.
Welcome to the podcast, folks. How's everybody doing? Happy Thursday. Well, the number of ounces of silver needed to buy an ounce of gold at now 30-year highs. Silver is bargain priced when compared to gold, and it's the perfect time to protect a portion of your savings with silver. Silver Gold Bull has a wide variety of the best value silver for every budget. Simply text or email Grahame for details. It's down in the show notes. Whether you're a seasoned investor or new to precious metals, Grahame will work with you to answer all your questions and recommend the best products to meet your investing goals. If you're on silvergoldbull.ca or .com, any purchases made, just make sure to reference the Shaun Newman Podcast. Well, since 2010, I don't know why that sounded so weird, Guardian Plumbing and Heating have been keeping homes, farms, and businesses running smoothly. And farmers, this one's just for you. The Guardian's efficient grain dryers and Guardian power stations aren't just available here. They're available all across Canada. The power station is an absolute game changer, giving you 2-for-1 utilities, heat, and electricity from the same reliable system. It's an innovative way to keep your operation running efficiently and save on energy costs. Just go to guardianplumbing.ca. They're protecting their customers from the unexpected through innovative solutions. That's Guardian Plumbing and Heating. Ignite Distribution is a high-service supply company based in Wainwright, Alberta, specializing in automotive parts and a wide range of additional products, including safety equipment, welding supplies, fasteners, and janitorial items. Operating as a Napa Auto Parts retailer, the company has recently expanded in Wainwright to a 15,000-square-foot facility, fully stocked to meet your needs and make it efficient as possible. Founded in 2011, Ignite Distribution emphasizes exceptional customer service and inventory management solutions to reduce downtime and purchasing costs for businesses and individuals. Reach out to Shane Stafford at 780-842-3433. Farmers, when it comes to precision planting, well, all you got to do is look to GoTech here locally, as they have revolutionized farming with precision planting, or precision planting has revolutionized farming, and it's with its innovative technology to boost efficiency and profitability. Well, planter optimization now spans the entire crop cycle, offering hardware, software upgrades that work seamlessly across brands and models, giving you unmatched control over your operation. And locally, GoTech is here to serve you. Scott, your trusted expert, and Jeff on the team as well, bringing fresh energy and ideas together. They're committed to delivering the same hands-on support you've come to rely on. Look no further than GoTech here locally. Substack, free to subscribe to. You got the weekend reviews, you got the debriefs for paid subscribers, you got some behind the scenes for paid subscribers. So if you're, and I tried my hand. I was curious what everybody's thought of my thoughts on the Godfather movie was. If you're just subscribe to it, you got that article. And lots of interesting feedback. If you read it, you can always shoot me a text if you're wanted to share your thoughts and, not keen on sharing it on Substack. I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are. We got the new studio coming here in 2025, and you can still be a part of that value for value wall. And whether it's just your individual name or if you're a company, you want to get involved, reach out to me on the text line. Would love to hear your thoughts. If you're listening or watching on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Rumble, X, make sure to subscribe. Make sure to leave a review. Make sure to do all the things. And how about we get on to that tale of the tape? He's the CEO of Armstrong Analytics and is renowned for his economic forecasting model, the economic confidence model. I'm talking about Martin Armstrong. So buckle up. Here we go. Welcome to the Shaun Newman Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Martin Armstrong. Martin, thanks for giving me some time this morning.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. Nice to see you.
Well, I know on this side, now having actually shook your hand and gotten to have you, up for a few days and be a part of the Cornerstone Forum, sitting down this morning, it feels like talking to an old friend now, which is pretty cool. Finally getting to meet people in person really adds perspective into who the guest is. And certainly I know a ton of feedback came from the Cornerstone Forum and a lot of it surrounding, you being there. So I just wanted to say thank you on air again for making the trip up north.
Well, it was at least warm. Like I said at your conference the last time I was up there at Edmonton, it was 40 below. And you didn't even open your mouth because your teeth hurt. But
Well, we made sure that the sun was shining,
yes.
Um, I mean, I'm curious your thoughts on this. I want to talk about all the things going on in the world, but one of the conversations that I've been, I don't know, not struggling with, but I really wanted your perspective on. You know, um, when we look at the big players, you look at the U.S., Britain, Russia, China. Maybe I'm missing a couple that you'd like to add in. One of the things I've been trying to decipher, with specifically China. I have a whole bunch of people that say China isn't the real culprit, but if you tell Canadians that, it's like telling them the sky isn't blue, because you're seeing MPs being tied there. You're seeing different things with um, real estate and buying up farmland and just the list goes on. Oil companies, etc. And it's so it's like right in front of them. And then I'll have different guests come on and talk about England and how, or Britain and how London, all roads lead back there. And I was just wondering, to start today, when you look at a country and you go, this is actually what's operating there, because you can have all these big players, but underneath the big players are actually the big players. How do you decipher who's actually making the moves for a country?
I mean, geopolitically or just from an investment standpoint?
Geopolitically.
Um, that is generally done by the people that profit from it. And that's not the uh, average person or investor who's buying farmland or something like that. There is a book actually that I would recommend, and it was uh, by a former general, uh, Medley Butler. And the book is written in 1935 and it's still very relevant today. It's called War is a Racket. And after fighting in the Spanish American War, Philippines, a number of these other things, um, he concluded that these wars are based uh, solely to benefit certain people. And he had an interesting um, solution that would be very controversial to implement. But he said if you're going to draft people to be in war, they should be the only ones that should be allowed to vote for it. Secondly, he said if you're going to conscript people and force them to go to war, then the capital should equally be conscripted for war. So you take, 5% of everybody's accounts or whatever. Obviously, that would cause a major uprising. And that was his point. He also said that we should not be involved in wars unless it involves U.S. soil, not Philippines and all these other places. And he was actually, he had the Medal of Honor. I mean, he couldn't be ignored. He was, that, prestigious at the time. And I would recommend to read his book. It's very, very enlightening, and he calls it War is a Racket. And it was actually Eisenhower who I think maybe read his book and kind of popularized the idea of the military complex, because that's basically what he was talking about. It's, you know, the reason we're going into war is, quite frankly, governments refuse to reform. And, I've been dealing with them for 50 some years. And nobody's ever been able to answer a question. Why are we borrowing if you have no intention of paying anything back? I've yet to ever get an answer from any government. Well, that's just what everybody does, and that's pretty much it. And I think this is all coming to a head, and it's from the political elite, not the average person or even the average corporation. It's the government knows it's in trouble, and instead of reforming, they become more authoritarian, and that's where we're heading into, like, this 2032 stuff. It was like Vance stood up there at the Munich Security Conference and gave him hell about restricting free speech, because that's what it is. We don't want people criticizing us, so shut them up. They think that they can stop that. All right. What they did to me was the same thing. Instead of saying maybe the computer model I developed actually worked, instead they prefer to say, oh, it's just me and I have untold influence because I have more, minions following me than they did, and so they tried to take me out of the game, but nothing changed. I mean, the market still crashed. Whatever. 07, it crashed, and they were saying on the floor, "Oh, it's Armstrong's revenge," because it comes out to the very day. So it's not me, but this is the way they are, as well. I mean, it's like, let's clamp down, shut down all the free speech, so we'll be able to control what we need to control, and it's not going to work. It
Well,
didn't work.
I had a thought with Rebecca Koffler and Alex Craner when they were on last week, and what I see happening, and you just pointed it out, right? By silencing voices, they don't have the they'd call it dissent, and I would just call it common sense entering, like balancing the conversation, and that allows them to keep doing what they're doing. Do you think that in their head they go, if we remove Armstrong, if we remove whoever else is there, that that won't happen. We'll just keep we're right. We'll just keep going this way,
Yeah.
and we'll be good, because they've been not only your voice but like a ton of voices. If they don't walk in a certain narrative, they get removed, and so now they get to be like, "Yep, we're right. This is exactly what's going to happen," and now they don't hear the other side of the tale. But the other side of the tale has its day, like the other side of the, as you pointed out with the market crash.
Yeah, I mean, they tried it with COVID, silencing anybody that criticized it. And I mean, I forget, I had done one podcast, and I wasn't really advocating anything other than I said, yeah, no, the problem was, the vaccines that caused a lot of civil unrest. And it was, YouTube, got all upset and had to make sure that that was taken down. And I wasn't even advocating anything. I was just stating a fact. But I used the word vaccine. Oh my God. It's like it was blasphemy or something. I don't know. But I mean, this is typical. If all governments will act like a cornered wild animal, and they will not reform. They will fight to the to the death, really. And this is what revolutions are about. They get indoctrinated with their own power. Just like, any drug, it's just an addict, become an addict to it. And they only look at things from their perspective. And that's the problem. I mean, so we end up, what the computer is forecasting is historically always the outcome. It's nothing new. They will fight to the end. Look, Carney was, he ran against Trump. That's basically what, he didn't address all the domestic issues or things of that nature. He was running against Donald Trump. You look at Europe, all they talk about is Putin, Putin, Putin. They don't deal with their own issues. NATO should have been shut down. The only purpose of NATO was to defend against the Warsaw Pact. That all fell apart. So to keep their jobs, they have to keep saying the same nonsense as Khrushchev. Oh, Putin's wants to take all of Europe. For what? Khrushchev, it was communism is better than capitalism. It was like an economic religion. All right. Putin's been there for 26 years. He hasn't made any such moves. And he's not a communist and he's not an oligarch. And Europe has nothing worthwhile conquering. They have to buy their energy from Russia. They don't have gold, deposits and stuff like this. At least, like when you look at Asia, why did Japan invade Manchuria? Because it was profitable. All right. They had to buy their energy from the United States. They had no natural resources. So they invaded Manchuria to get that. Just look at wars throughout the centuries. Alexander the Great conquered all these different countries because it was profitable. The soldiers participated in the spoils. You think he could have said, let's go invade this country. You're not going to get anything because there's no value, but I just want to do it. They wouldn't have followed. Simple as that, But this is, governments. This is, why governments fail. Because honestly, if that statement was wrong, we would still be speaking Babylonian, there isn't a government that has survived, period. The one that lasted the most was the Roman Empire, and that at least did so because they were not involved in all this socialistic nonsense. When they conquered a country, they allowed it to keep its culture, its gods, whatever. It didn't say you have to now do ours. As long as it was a common market, it was beneficial to be part of Rome rather than to be outside. You can make vases in Gaul or France and sell them to somebody in Syria. You couldn't do that if you were outside. So it was free trade that basically, and no income tax or anything of that nature. The maximum tax was about 7%. That's why people stayed. That's why Rome lasted for 1,000 years. It's the income tax is a Marxist dream because they've always they hate people that have more than they do. And that's even in the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. Why? Because this has been a human fault for a long time. Sparta was a communist state. They never even issued coins because they didn't want anybody to have any material wealth. They invaded. and destroyed Athens in 404 BC. So, I mean, the fact that that's in the Ten Commandments shows that this has been around for a very long time. It's not something new.
When you this 2032 date, and I've probably said this every time you come on, every time that year comes up. That was the first time in 2020 was the first time I heard you say 2032, and I'm like, 2032, what is he talking about? And as we march closer to it, we're 7 years away, or I guess less than 7 years away now. What do you see in the next 7 years? And if I could just add into that, like Putin is, barring health or something crazy, like, I don't know, an assassination, he's going to be still in power. You got Trump, who's got a few more years left. You got Carney, who, unless they find a way to call an early election, he's going to be around till 2029. I'm sure you could walk through every world leader. So I just look at Putin and the way he's been positioning himself, and it kind of, the visualization I have of it is Muhammad Ali on the ropes. He's just tiring the opposing force out as they try and drill him and try and get him to react. But you slowly close in on 2032. At some point, I assume he does react, or the West goes into full out war. But maybe what do you see in the lead up to 2032?
Well, I think Putin is the smartest guy in the ring. I mean, he's clearly the smartest head of state that's out there. And he understands the game. He's put down so many different red lines. Oh, if you send, missiles to Ukraine and they attack inside of Russia, that's going to be it. He doesn't do anything. They have deliberately crossed every single red line he's put down. Why? Because they need him to attack anything in NATO so they can claim he's the aggressor. Then they can draft, we're the guys with the white hats. Go, you have to go die for us. I have friends that are Vietnam vets, and now they see the truth. That the tapes have come out. Johnson knew it was a lie. We were never attacked. They just made up the Tonkin Gulf stuff. He even said, for all I know, they were shooting at whales that night. You have John, McNamara, who was the neocon Secretary of State, took us into Vietnam. You can see his apology on YouTube. He said, very sorry before he died. We were wrong. We thought Russia was involved. It was just a civil war. Well, 58,000 Americans died, and how many millions of other people? So I have friends that have been in Vietnam, and now they're pissed off as hell because they were lied to as to what they were actually there doing. And that's why I recommend this book, War is a Racket, because it's always a lie. Weapons of mass destruction never existed. Germany had put out an ad in the New York newspapers. Do not sail on the Lusitania. They're using it for, to covert weapons. Oh, absolutely no way. We wouldn't do that. We wouldn't use, private citizens as a shield. They sunk the boat. They used that for World War I. And then in 1987, you can look up an archaeological magazine. They discovered where it was. And then suddenly the government comes out, oh, be careful, there's ammunition in the hull. I mean, they lie about everything. They never have told the truth about one single war yet. Just the way it is. Excuse me.
I use the Lusitania all the time because after you told me that story, probably what was that, a year or two ago, I find that story really interesting because there's articles written on it as late as 2013 is the one I'm thinking of, but I'm sure there's more where they talk about sending divers down, and you can see the armaments, and you can just
Yeah.
see it how you can go back and look at the newspaper clippings and be like, holy crap, right? And so like nobody, well, I shouldn't say nobody's alive. There's probably a few people that are still alive, but for most of us, that's before our time. There's no emotional connection to that, other
Right.
than we've learned about World War One. And so when I share that story, I'm like, they're right there. Okay. The great United States, who would never lie to you or have your best interest at heart, pulled you into a war off of doing something that sacrificed American lives so that they could then get the emotional response from the US public that they were looking for, so they could justify going to war. When you fast forward to today, are we getting smarter or are we not? Because you go like, they are pushing as hard as they can for a war with Russia. Like
Yeah.
it's got to insane levels. Just what was that? 10 days ago, roughly, they hit Russia, deep within Russia, and they're looking for the response back, I assume, of what Putin's going to do. And you go, well, why would they do that? Well, they want war with Russia, and they need
Yeah.
something to justify it to not only the American people, the Canadian people, the people of Britain, the people of Germany and France, and all the different places. And right now, they can paint this big bad man, big boogeyman of Putin, but nobody wants war, or at least that's the sense I get. What do you see?
The elite want it. The average person, no, we get nothing out of it. I mean, I can tell you that NATO has already told Canada to boost its military spending, and they will impose drafts in Canada for this. This is what's coming. That's why they wanted Carney. The EU was, interfered in the Romanian elections twice. Why? Because Romania, they were building the biggest NATO base in all of Europe to attack Russia. Um, I mean, look, you can go on Wikipedia, look at Google up Project Northwoods, and there was a proposal which has been declassified. They proposed killing Americans, blaming it on Cuba to justify an invasion. And Kennedy refused and shut it down. That's one of the reasons he wanted to shut the CIA down. And lo and behold, the CIA ends up taking him out. I mean, there's documents. I put it on there. One CIA guy, a document that finally just came out, thanks to Trump. The CIA guy told his friends that a group of CIA agents killed Kennedy, and he was afraid for his life. He was then shot to death in Washington a few weeks later. Look, these are nasty people. They only see their side of the coin. That's it. And anybody that opposes them is just, a traitor, whatever. It's my concern is that they would create a false flag, just like this Project Northwoods tried to justify a Cuban, invasion, killing Americans and blaming it on somebody else. This is how they create these wars. Weapons of mass destruction never existed. And I'm concerned that Putin understands what's going on. That's why he will not attack NATO. He will respond, yes, but against Ukraine. Okay. It's look. It's they just want war with Russia. Simple as that. You have these neocons. I've been to dinner with some of them. I can tell you that it was Bill Kristol's father that created the movement. And I knew Bill. I argued with him. He even spoke at one of our conferences. And I argued with him back in the 90s. He said, if we take out Saddam Hussein, Assad out of Syria, and Gaddafi will bring peace to the Middle East. Total bullshit. I said, you've obviously never been there. They don't see themselves as Syrian Iraqis, or they see themselves as Shiite versus Sunni versus Kurd. This is it. It's just, I don't know. I really think that they were psychologically damaged in the 50s, having to hide underneath their desks during air raid drills or something. But, as I've said before, I was in Washington when Gorbachev made his speech and Reagan wanted to go meet him. And they told Reagan they couldn't say he was a communist anymore. So they said, well, you can never trust a Russian. So it was like they just need an enemy. All right, fine. They were communists before. Well, all right, they're not communists, but they're just Russian now. So what's the issue? At least Gorbachev was trying to take communism and eradicate capitalism. I understand that. That's not the question today. You go to China, you go to Russia, Eastern Europe. Nobody wants to go back to communism. Even China. It's, yes, they kept the name of Communist Party. Are they communists? Of course not. But if they change the name of the party, they then have to admit that Mao was wrong and take his picture off the Forbidden Wall, or the Forbidden City, But it's so that's Asian culture, So they're not communists. There's everybody has private ownership, whatever, and they're not going to ever be able to go back. Same thing in Russia. Same thing in Eastern Europe. There's no shot at going back to communism. And it's we now have to deal with communism light version, which is socialism, which is the same bullshit. Equality. Really. You're trying to change human nature. They don't like the fact that somebody makes more money than they do. Well, Henry Ford invented the assembly line. And instead of saying, how many jobs has he created? They basically just say, excuse me, how much money has he made? He created a whole industry. That's irrelevant. Oh, he made money. That's bad. This is what these people are. They can't stand that somebody else has more than they have. And that's what the Ten Commandments was about. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. And they have been doing this forever.
When you brought up a military draft, that's coming, like it's a foregone conclusion. My brain goes right now. Maybe I'm wrong about Canada, but I'm like, it would have to be something serious to implement a military draft where people would go along with that. Or do you just think they implement it and then you have a lot of civil unrest over that idea?
These people tend to think, they believe their own bullshit. They think I write a law and they will have to comply. This is the way they actually look at it. They don't look at practical things. There's a very interesting speech. I put it on. It's on my site. That one of the at the Nuremberg trials, they asked one of the top German generals, how did you get the German people to go to war, etc.? And he says, oh, that's easy. You just tell them they're going to be attacked. And anybody that's against it, you call them, basically traitors. And this is standard. You're seeing with COVID. Anybody that was against COVID, oh, they're dangerous, they're this or that. I mean, they demonize them. This is what they will do, and this is what Germany did, and this is what every country does. So
is our time different in the sense, like one of the things I admire about you is your knowledge of history. Where we sit right now, the trust in our media has got to be at all-time lows.
yeah, it is.
So them demonizing, like I think of Alberta and the conversation around independence right now. They're coming out with the same traitor, this, that, everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, there's a growing I don't know what the number is, but there's a growing portion of the population in Alberta specifically just doesn't give a crap of what they say we are. They just don't care. It's like, I don't care what you call it. And
yeah,
if you go
your polls are close to 60% in favor of leaving Canada. Look, I'll tell you how to be the star in the world. You separate. Don't join the United States. And the reason I say that, if you separate, become your own independent nation, not sovereign within Canada like Quebec. Separate. You eliminate income tax. All right, you put a flat 15% corporate tax, period, and a retail sales tax. That's it. You do that, you will find your houses are going to go up. Everybody's going to want to move there. Companies will develop there. Employment will skyrocket. Why? Look, as you know, I restructured multinational companies. Got to meet Margaret Thatcher, and I was putting like auto manufacturers and anybody needs skilled labor in Britain. And she asked me, why was I doing that? I said, because if I paid the exact same wage to somebody in Germany as I do in Britain, the regulations on top of that the company must pay is 40% higher in Germany versus Britain. She wasn't aware of that. All right. I got called in by one of the top German companies over there at the time. And they said, we need you here at our board meeting first thing in the morning. I said, what's up? Oh, you'll find out when you get here. I get there, they appoint our firm advisor to the pension fund, and everybody's resigning. I said, what the hell is going on here? And they had asked the government to reduce their workforce by 20%. The government approved. Then at the last minute, equality came in. You can't, it's not fair for you to pick and choose. You have to make the offer, I think it was $150,000, to voluntarily give up your job. So what happens? The people that knew they could get a job across the street took the $150,000 and left. The people that couldn't get a job someplace else, the very ones that they wanted to get rid of, stayed. All right. And I told this story to a board member of the IMF. And they said to me, you're absolutely right. We found the same thing in Greece took place. I said, it's human nature. You cannot change human nature with these socialistic ideas of equality. We're not all equal. We're equal in rights only, not in talent. It's, you don't want me to be a brain surgeon. This is just the way it is. You don't, get in a cab and the guy looks like, nice, gee, you're free tomorrow. I need some teeth pulled out,
Well, you could do that. I don't think the experience would be that good.
It would probably make a good TV show, but I mean, it's just, we're all different. We have different talents. So, I mean, but that's what communism refused they try to reduce everybody to the same drone status. And socialism does the same thing. All right. Oh, and all you hear about it, oh, equality, equality. It's not fair. It's not, he's got more than I have. It's not everybody wants to work so much. Some people are workaholics like me, and other ones like as least you can possibly do, you do. It's that's human nature. You cannot go against that. So, these people in government, they think they can. They have the pen to make a law, and if you don't do what I tell you to do, I'm going to put your ass in jail. That's fine for an individual. When you get a society moving up, that report I just put out was inspired by Alberta. Right? It's on our site for, I think, 1995. How to separate. I went through all the separations of governments throughout history. I was surprised when I did the research, and that's the way you should do research. You don't start with a presumption. Separation takes place. Most average was less than 15% of the people, because the majority ends up just going with the flow. And I had lunch with probably 30 years ago in Vancouver. Mike Campbell was there, but his brother Gordon, and I think Gordon at the time was the mayor of Vancouver or something. I forget. Then he went off and became, the ambassador for, Canada in London. And I forget what it was, but there was some sort of protest, and they were in front of his house and making a real ruckus, and the TV cameras were there. And he said to me, Marty, he said, because we were talking about politics, and he said, the minority always gets what they want, because they are the ones that make a real ruckus. The TV cameras come out and show them, and then you're forced to basically respond to that. He says the vast majority of people never get off their ass. And he was right. And he told me that at a breakfast meeting, I think it must have been 30, 40 years ago. And what I have seen ever since with different governments and with this report, it confirmed it. I was shocked. I went through all the various different revolutions, and they were always with a minority. The biggest minority I ever saw was finally towards the end of the American Revolution, up to 40% wanted revolution. Still not the majority. You see the same thing in France. The vast, I would say, most common was less than 15%.
So if you had less than 15% of the population, or 15% or less, that wanted something, or I guess separation, or like to get out of what they were in, that's when it happens.
Yeah, it's
so when you sit here,
you're already at least at 40%.
Well, the last poll I saw was like 30-some% wanted it, and then there was like an additional, am I spacing on my numbers here? Was it 10%? Was it 20%? We're kind of like, kind of like, so So when you hit 30-some%, are like, we want this. You're in your world of the report you've done, of all the research, you go, oh, it's going to happen.
Yeah, it's simple as that. It's look, what I said at your conference was that when they created the Federal Reserve in 1913, they had 13 branches, and they were all independent. And the main thing was about they understood regional capital flows. Like 1906, the San Francisco earthquake, but the insurance companies are on the East Coast, so the money moves from the East to the West, and then there's a shortage of cash in the East, so banks fail, etc. So they created the Fed with 13 branches, and they were all independent. What happened? All right, FDR comes in, wants to create his New Deal, his socialistic agenda. He usurps all the power, sticks it in Washington. And so why do we still have 13 branches? They're irrelevant anymore. The interest rate is set by Washington. That's it. Now, Canada followed that model. So in the 80s, when you had a big real estate boom in Toronto, they're raising interest rates to absurd levels, and you're putting farmers and miners in bankruptcy in Alberta. There are regional differences, and one size does not fit all. Simple as that. And, you have lost, basically, they have no, Trudeau had no respect for Alberta whatsoever. His agenda was coming from Klaus Schwab out of the WEF, and I know Klaus, okay? And Klaus was basically an academic. That's it. And it's always the academics. Oh, wouldn't the world be nice if we were all equal? It's all this bullshit again. And so Trudeau bought into that. And there's always a backdrop. Somebody's going to benefit. Who paid for Greta to fly to Alberta? To say, yes, cut off all the energy, surrender your jobs, and go on welfare. Who paid for that? All right, it's how's a 16-year-old girl become an expert in this bullshit anyhow? And all you have to do is just look at history, and you can see that climate change is BS. We've always had booms, rising temperatures, falling ice ages, warming periods, long before there were fossil fuels. It's a natural cycle of the earth, period. You have the current already shifting in the Atlantic, and you're heading more towards colder periods. It's the warm water that in the Atlantic, the current that takes it up north, that keeps Europe even warm. I mean, just look at the map. Where does Rome sit? About very close to where New York is. Most of Europe is like where Edmonton is, where it's way up north. Yet there are palm trees you'll see on the Scottish coast because the water is warm. And that circulation is shifting, and they know it has shifted before. The warm water doesn't go up there, you're heading into a very, very cold period for Europe. Crops will not grow. There'll be shortages of food. This is part of the natural cycle if you just sit back and look at actual history and forget the bullshit.
But once again, when you bring in climate, they've done the same thing there. Anyone who talks out against it, they remove them because they, I was watching a documentary on Capone and about prohibition, and when it came in, his eyes lit up, and I'm, you probably know the story better than I do because I've always been fascinated why the government thought getting rid of all alcohol was going to work, right? And then of course you get bootlegging because they see a huge need. What did the population want? They wanted access to alcohol. Simple as that. So what did entrepreneurs, although maybe of the criminal sort, do? They found a way to give the people what they wanted. And when you look at climate change or you look at different things, you just see people, if you follow the money and what they're doing, like you can actually start to see, well, they're creating a crisis or they're creating this movement and then they're profiteering off of it. And I was watching the thing on Capone, and I was like, it's never made sense to me. Like I get the idea of like cutting out all alcohol, but I think it's just a terrible idea because, people want it. So what are they going to do? They're going to find ways to get it. So Capone walks in and he's got his background in the mafia, and they find a way to give it to him. And so then, like I don't know, your thoughts, Martin?
It was the prohibition that created the mafia. There was very little mafia organizations before that. That's what made them profitable. Um, drugs. I mean, all this stuff. I mean, you can outlaw it. There's somebody always going to do more drugs than they should have and died of an overdose. It's just the way it is. You cannot regulate human nature. You just can't. And I mean, some people are always going to, go, when we were kids, back in my day, you smoked because it meant, oh, others are smoking, so that shows I'm grown up, and it had nothing to do, was it something you really wanted to do? No. Peer pressure, whatever. But, it's, the whole thing, it's always about government. And what you do is when you outlaw something, you create a black market. It's always going to be that way. You eliminate the paper currency, you go to digital currencies, there's going to be a black market. Always will be.
They just assume that by doing digital currency, the black market won't be that big.
Look, the way they look at it, and I have argued face to face with some of these people in governments about it. But they have these deficits, perpetual. They don't blame themselves, they blame us. Oh, it's because people aren't paying them what they should. So if they eliminate paper money, all right, and go to digital, they think they'll eliminate crime. And everybody will have to pay the taxes. We can just take it out of their accounts. This is what's coming. This is why they want it. It's the next stage in their desperate authoritarian maneuvers to retain power. And it's not going to work. Once they start doing stuff like that, and Europe is the one moving for it, the Fed came out and said they can't, and Trump said no, because really they didn't give an explanation, but constitutionally they cannot. If the Fed created a central bank digital currency, it would need a search warrant to look at your account. So it can't do that. So you have the private banks trying to create things. That's fine. Okay. It's kind of like the COVID model. All right. The Constitution, First Amendment says the government shall not restrict free speech. Fine. They didn't do it. They picked up the phone, called YouTube and said, hey, got that guy off. I didn't do it. YouTube did. This is the way that governments function. All right. It's like we're in a proxy war with Russia. Oh, well, we're not. It's Ukraine. Really? But we're giving the weapons to Ukraine to do it. I mean, I published on our site. I mean, Boris Johnson actually came out, and it's on the front page of the Nordic News. We're in a proxy war with Russia. He's admitted that Britain is at war with Russia publicly. I mean, we're not talking about conspiracy theories or my opinion versus somebody else's. This is reality. So I say, Putin understands what the risk is. It's Trump, I think, has been naive. Um, if I'm Putin, there's no way I'm agreeing to any kind of a peace deal. Why? Because Europe is stabbing Trump in the back. They don't want peace. They want war. They're already admitting they're at war. And you had Merz out there. I can tell you that I have one politician that was in meetings in Brussels and called me and said, why is Germany the number one push for war? I said, because they're also the one that's failing. All right. I had another source attended the Vienna Peace Conference a couple of months ago. Same thing. Calls me and says, hey, this is no longer about peace. This is all about war. Preparing to draft people, etc., etc., etc. They want war. If I'm Putin, I'm looking at all this, what I know versus I'm sure he knows more. Would I agree to peace? Absolutely no way.
Why does failing countries equal war?
Because once the way we're in this Ponzi scheme of debt, and this is the real core problem. You have government since basically Keynes approved the deficit, and they just do it all the time. They keep borrowing year after year after year with no intention of paying anything back. This is, the interest expenditures this year in the U.S. are $1 trillion. U.S. national debt hit $1 trillion in 1980 under Reagan. Now we're talking about just interest expenditures. I mean, the interest will crowd out everything else. It just multiplies. All right, it's like cockroaches. You're not. You got one, you're going to have 100 pretty soon. It will crowd out all other spending. It's already increased more than military. So it's not sustainable. Europe is a basket case. So the choice from their perspective, we either have war or the default comes when you can no longer sell the debt. All right. In the United States, the Treasury was not selling the debt directly. It had primary dealers. So to be a primary dealer, you had to guarantee to buy a certain amount of U.S. debt. So the new issue would come out, the banks would buy it, and then the banks would resell it. Okay. You are now reaching the point that you're beyond the capacity of the banks to even buy the new debt. It's more than their capitalization. The system is coming to an end. All right. And it comes crashing down when you can no longer issue new debt to pay off the old. When you can't sell the new debt, that's it. You can't pay off the old. It comes crashing down. You have laws in there that are self-destructive. All right. On average, at least 70% of all the pension funds in Europe must have government debt, even though it went negative. For Social Security, 100% U.S. government debt. You default on the debt, there goes Social Security. It's so interconnected that they need war as the diversion to keep the game going. So they think. But if they don't have war and they default, the people are going to be storming the parliaments in Europe with pitchforks. That's what will happen. And this is not, I'm just telling you what history does all the time. It's not an opinion. It's not, conspiracy theory or any other bullshit. It's straight up. This is what history shows us. It has a roadmap to the future. Simple as that.
I was wondering, you talk draft, well, coming here in the years to come. You've mentioned military drafts, CBDCs, censorship, which obviously all of us can see. When you look at drafts through different countries when they've implemented them, has it been universal that like most people are accepting of the draft and they carry on, or is it a pretty controversial thing to do?
It's controversial, but I mean, the majority just simply, I mean, in the Vietnam days, people showed up. They were believing the bullshit. Well, if you're not a patriot, all this stuff. Um, I can tell you we have staff in Germany. They've already told me that people that are already part of the reserve have been called up to report at 60 years old.
At 60?
At 60. The draft age is universally in Europe being up to 60 years old because they don't have the people. Birth rates have declined. Japan's got problems back there. The same thing. Even China has raised the draft age. Look, I've tried screaming from the top of the roofs. If we don't change these people, this is where we're going. I mean, I've tried to defeat my own computer all the time. I always lose.
It doesn't work?
I lose, it wins. The movie they're doing on me, one of the questions was, how does it feel to live through your own forecast? I said, not so great, But look, I've done my best to try to defeat my own forecast, but I lose all the time.
And man, when you go back to Vietnam in the draft, and you're like, most people go along, the things that are popularized, I feel like, whether it's in Hollywood or just in general media, is how many people didn't want to go, and how many people pushed on it, and the protests and everything else. Is that all BS then, or was that certainly there? It just wasn't as much as, you talk about minorities and how they can move things. Was that just a minority of the population that voiced their?
No, it was a minority, but they were growing, and inside sources from what I have been told, Richard Nixon was elected, I think, with one of the largest popular votes in history. Why? Because he was also said he was taking us the hell out of Vietnam. So what did they do? You have Watergate. The guys that magically get caught, ex-CIA. How about that? I think a couple guys from the local hood could have done a better job. Oh, you got me. Sorry about that. Oh, yes. Well, he told me to do it. They basically set Nixon up. There was also a tape that he had the head of the CIA in his office. And he said, all he said was, I know who killed JFK. Now you're talking to the CIA, which we now know did kill JFK. All right. So they couldn't assassinate him. So they set up Watergate and did everything to get him the hell out of power. And I actually bumped in to Nixon on the beach after he was president. And I was surprised. Apparently he wrote his memoirs, on the beach in Long Beach Island. I had a house there. He was maybe about 10 houses from me or something like that. I was walking the beach and there he is. what shocked me was he wasn't surrounded by Secret Service. I was like, huh? I've dealt with politicians, and he wasn't surrounded. And said, hi, how you doing? Just being polite. And I Googled it. When he left office, and you can check this out, he refused to accept protection from the Secret Service. Why? You don't find any explanation, but, just look at Trump. He was denied sniper protection, etc., except suddenly they showed up that day in Pennsylvania. The guy shoots Trump, he missed, and then they shoot him in the head. Same as Oswald. Kill the guy, can't be a trial. He's not going to say, well, I was told to do this because of him. It's always the same MO. But it always surprised me. Nixon had said to the head of the CIA, I know who killed JFK. Nixon also wanted to shut down the CIA for the same reasons Kennedy did. And suddenly you end up with Watergate. He's drummed out of the office and refuses to accept those, security. Excuse me. And I always wondered, okay, fine. He never came out and said why, that I know of. But a former president of the United States refusing to accept protection from the Secret Service after saying he knew that the CIA basically killed Kennedy. I think that's a very interesting little tidbit.
Well, you as a man who've come face to face with the machine of the United States of America, would you accept protective detail
No.
from the same machine that put you there?
Absolutely no way. And that's why when Trump was charged in New York, I put out a post. I said, now he's going to see what New York's like. When Jeffrey Epstein, where he was put into a cell, and you can look it up, I said, okay, the question is, does he commit suicide before the plea or after? They never will allow somebody like that to testify. He goes to trial with, look, Epstein was not some pedophile. Pedophile was like somebody going after a 6-year-old or whatever. Everybody that he brought into this wasn't like some friends from the local pub. You're talking about Bill Clinton, Prince. I mean, they're all people that could be blackmailed for objectives. Well, look, I've said it before, years ago, dealing with in New York or Wall Street, I was warned. Be careful. They will always try to use a good-looking girl to get into you. Anytime some good-looking girl would come up and go, yeah, what do you want? Kind of like hold up the... it's just... It's the MO. They used Elliot Spritzer to take out Hank Greenberg, who was the head of AIG, because he objected to the mortgage-backed securities. He wouldn't insure them. So they feed all this stuff to the prosecutor. Elliot Spritzer says, all right, fine, I'll drop the charges against AIG, but he has to resign. So he resigned. Spritzer was being fed the information. Now he thinks, oh, I'm powerful. Now I'll go after Wall Street. What happens? All of a sudden, oh, here's checks surface. He was paying hookers. ends up having to resign. Come on, I mean, it's always the same MO. It's always the same thing. Nothing different. I mean, Elliot Spritzer, you know, was set up. Epstein, the real question of Epstein. I mean, you just look at what I really lost a lot of respect for Elon Musk. He came out with his tweet, which he then deleted. Oh, the reason they didn't release the Epstein files is because Trump was in it. Really? The Democrats had these files. They would have brought that out against Trump in a blink of an eye. Everybody that I know, Trump was not in those damn files. What's in the files? And what's the problem? The real problem is, who was Epstein working for? The two rumors are, one is CIA, the other one is Mossad. Who? But all these people, they're all high-level people who could be bribed to do a favor. You release that list, people think, oh, they're all fed up. No, sorry, you're barking up the wrong tree. You release that list, and you may then expose other things. What did you do? What was the blackmail you did? And then the real question is, who was Epstein working for? That's the real question. Who was he doing this for? You look at, I think the prosecutor's name was Costa or something, the first case against him in Florida. The prosecutor drops the charges. He gets some call and says he's connected to intelligence. He drops the case. I mean, look, they don't do this. I mean, if he was doing this for personal gratification, you don't bring in all these high-level people. Maybe you bring in some guys from a local pub. Hey, you want to, we can have some fun or whatever. You don't bring in the President Bill Clinton. You don't bring in, Prince Andrew and all the way down the list. I think one of the girls even said that Epstein told her that Clinton owes him. For what? But this is the way the world really works. It's always, what can I get out of it? I think personally, even Bill Gates, I would suspect, that his involvement was for the same thing. Can you get some dirt on certain people so they do what I want them to do? That's what I think. But look, that's a game that I was warned about, 30 years ago. Be careful.
Well, I mean, there's proverbs about women in general, and I would allude to that, beautiful women. So I think it goes back a lot longer than just the last 30 years. Like this has been something through history that it isn't the first time people have been blackmailed into doing things for them. It's just in our lifetime, it's on such a epic level, at least, to know that presidents of the United States and different parts of the monarchy and on it goes. Like what's up? When you look at the next, 7 years roughly, as we march closer and closer to 2032, I brought this up with Tom Luongo probably a year or two ago. What's the average person supposed to do with this information of CBDCs, drafts, censorship? Those are dark days ahead. What are they supposed to do to insulate themselves from what's coming?
Well, the big problem I think we have is that I think the climate will turn colder. You're getting rice shortages in Japan. The colder climate, if the current does shift, that traditionally reduces the crops. Then you have war on top of this. When you go into war, you get shortages of food. In World War II, I mean, they had, they encouraging people to plant their own victory garden in their backyard. Um, I honestly suggest that you have at least a couple years worth of food that's, survivable. I mean, pasta or something, that will last. Um, and look, I think that's basically what you're really kind of looking at. Make sure that, I personally like the old silver coins, because somebody can look at the date and they at least know okay, anything before 65 is okay. There are videos of people being offered a chocolate bar and the bar is silver and they take the chocolate. um, Not everybody's going to know the difference between a silver bar and one that's nickel. But, an old Canadian quarter or American quarter, they can look at the date. Yeah, okay, fine. I know that one's good. So I think that is what you would use more for everyday type transactions. Usually you'll see a community will, somebody's a tailor, somebody's the baker, somebody's this, and everybody kind of cooperates together. That's Adam Smith's invisible hand. Even in prisons, you have the same thing. You have a black market economy that emerges. And the money used to be packs of cigarettes, then it became packs of mackerel, fish, when they outlawed the cigarettes. But so this is human nature. So, know your neighbors, because I think, that would be a little community where everybody helps this, each other out is good. But how do you pay for that? I think it's going to be small change in silver. Gold, I think, is more for the large transactions throughout history. Even you look at Florence. They had the florin, which was a gold coin. All right, that was for international trade. Then they had the silver coins. Your wages were paid in silver. Gold was for the international transactions. They've always had a two-tier type system. The King Croesus in 700, BC, refined the electrum, which was a natural mixture of gold and silver, and created the first, bimetal, monetary system, gold and silver. Silver was for the small transaction. Gold was for the major transactions. So, this has been throughout history. It's not something new. Certainly not my opinion or anything else. It's just, a fact of life.
Getting to ride around with you, Martin, for a few days, one of the things that I wrote down is you said, roughly, don't judge someone with the way you think, but on the way they think. That was
Correct.
a story you told me. And, there was a story associated with that thought process. When you look at the West and NATO and how they're handling Russia, you can kind of see everything we've talked about today. When you're trying to think on the way Putin thinks, he can't attack anything NATO because he knows what that will do. So, will there be repercussions for hitting deep in Russia? To basically summarize what you said, yes, but it's going to be in Ukraine.
Right.
If you're trying to put yourself in the shoes of Putin and how he's looking at the world, what is he waiting for? Or what is he looking at? Is it the dissolvement of NATO? Like, can NATO keep going the way it's going? Can it go a lot longer than I think? Or what is he waiting for? Like, when you're trying to put yourself in his shoes.
He knows the big one's coming. He has effectively doubled his military capacity. that's what he's done. He's increased his military. I think he's around 1.3 to 1.5 million now. He didn't have that many people in the military before. It's he knows what's coming, and on a conventional level, he is already probably maybe even 3 times that of Europe. So he knows what's coming. He's preparing that way.
And when you say the big one is coming, you mean World War III.
Yeah, Europe cannot possibly survive without war. What will happen is it will break up. I mean, I do podcasts from Netherlands to Palermo, Serbia, Croatia, pretty much everywhere throughout Europe. And even 3 years ago, they would say, "You really think the EU is going to break up?" Now, when I do these podcasts over there, I like to do them because it's the questions I like to listen to. And the questions now is no longer if, when. When do you think it's going to break? I hear the same frustrations from Italy, from Serbia, from Croatia, everywhere you go. It's Netherlands. I mean, I was asked the question, what would you tell our youth? That the guy was at a convention and the youth want to get out. And I said, leave. Get the hell out of there, otherwise you're going to be drafted.
So if you were talking specifically to Albertans, and I'll extend that to Western Canadians, because I know there's talks in Saskatchewan, there's probably talks going on in Manitoba, there's probably talks going on in BC, there's probably talks going on all over the place. Obviously, it's very heated here in Alberta specifically. But if you were talking to Albertans, would I be correct in summarizing that if you don't want to get to where we have drafts and are going to war that you don't want to go to, the easiest way to avoid that is to separate?
Yeah. That may be the final straw that causes it. Look, Carney is a European elite. Simple as that. He was part of the Edinburgh Zero, climate change nonsense. I cannot see, oh, okay, fine, I see the light, I was wrong. I don't see that happening. He's going to still try to impose restrictions one way or another on Alberta. From Trump's perspective, he looks at Canada from being likewise a natural resource oriented economy. He's looking at it from the standpoint that Europe is really an enemy, and so is China. So U.S. and Canada joining to him makes geopolitical sense as well as economic sense. If missiles were going to be, nukes were going to be fired from Russia to the United States, they're going to come over the top of the globe and over Canada. You don't go around the belly. That's too long. You come across the top. That's why he's talking about Greenland. All right, it was all top secret, but when I got into computers back then, it was in the 60s. That's what I kind of quit and went to trading, because all the married guys were being offered, London, Hawaii, Paris. I wasn't married, so I was being offered Thule, Greenland, which was all top secret back then, Guam or Vietnam. And I didn't want to do it. The Thule, Greenland back then was prop planes. and they couldn't get planes in all the time. So they would just drop you off, and you had to stay there a year and a day. And I did meet a guy that he did 2 terms there. And I said, "What did you do?" He said, "Nothing. I watched the same movie 40 or 50 times. I played cards and darts. That was about it." They needed you there in case something happened. Okay. That if NORAD went down, which protected, North America over the top of the globe, then somebody had to be there to make sure the systems were up. So that's why he was interested in Greenland. Geopolitical reasons, NORAD's there, Thule, Greenland. Everybody now knows that there's a base there. But back then, it was all top secret. I wasn't even allowed to talk about it. But that's where NORAD is. It's a big computer installation that watches the top of the globe.
I don't know if you've eased any of my fears today. You've probably just stacked on a whole bunch. Not that I'm, it's funny. I'm not overly stressed about it, because at times I'm like, I'm just one little minion. I don't know how much I can do. I just think, like as we inch closer to 2032, once upon a time, I was thinking like, that's 12 years away. Who's looking 12 years away? And I've shared this lots, as I probably mature as a husband and a father, and then as a podcast host, 12 years doesn't seem like much. Well, now we're 7 years. We're less than 7 years from 2032. And you go like, that isn't that far.
And just look at what's happened so far. That's
right. Like you look at all the things that have been coming down the pipe, and I go like, what is the system? What is the computer models projecting for, like, we don't have to go to 2032, but 2020, 2026, 2027, 2028, like, what are the next 3 years? Like, what do you think people should be paying attention to?
Well, 26 is where I think it all starts to really pick up in volatility next year. We're looking at sovereign default. This is where the real economic pressure is going to come into play on all government debt as of 26. And the risk of a world war probably comes into play by 27. Whether or not, I seriously doubt the European Union will survive past 29. And as we move into 32, it's not that that's when we have to wait. Shit's going to happen before then. So I see from, probably 27 on, I mean, it's going to get, if you understand what is coming, you can survive it. It's better than getting into a position where you're just going to be sucker punched. Oh, how the hell did that happen? I didn't notice that. Look, the system is collapsing because governments will not reform. You can go on YouTube. I laid out, it's called The Solution. You can Google that. It's on YouTube. How to get out of this. Will they do it? No. I was basically always the one pushing for liberty. Klaus Schwab was the one on the opposite side of the table when he said you're going to own nothing and be happy. That's his version of communism. All right, the government, his Great Reset, he basically took from our 2032. All right. Look, we started our World Economic Conference in 1985. I think even Mike Campbell came to that one. He started his first Davos in 1987. Marcus Vetter did the movie on me, The Forecaster. He goes to get a movie on him called The Forum a couple years later. Whatever I've done, he always copies. And this has just been why when Nigel Farage came and spoke at our conference in Rome in 2019, he said, "Of course I'm here. He's the alternative to Davos." We've just been. He is an academic who always advocated more and more government control, so that if the government has more power, it can suppress us too stupid to understand what's good for us, because only he knows better. And I'm on the opposite side, saying history says you never get it right, and I advocate more of following the model of the Roman Empire. It lasted 1,000 years. How? All right, freedom of religion. No income tax. Um, you know, like sanctions on Russia are stupid. That's what creates war. You
But if
think
you,
the average Russian blames Putin? No, they understand. Oh, this is the West. And an old friend that I met, we met in Tokyo probably 30 years ago. She's in Moscow. I'm still in touch with her periodically. And one of the questions is, she's not in government or anything. She was a translator back then. And so I asked her, how things going, and she responds is, "Why does everybody hate us so much?" She's just an average Russian.
if your story, you've told me about you and Klaus Schwab in the Forum and the Forecaster. Like you've told that story a lot. And when I look at that, it almost epitomizes the thought I've been having, which is, okay, so you have the Forum and you have the Forecaster. Two different ways of looking at the world on the largest stage, right? I mean, like,
Right.
I think Klaus Schwab has become a household name by, him basically talking about penetrating every government, right? And I think
Right.
here in Canada, people have seen that. Like, I mean, it's pretty self-evident. And his way has been promoted, pushed, like championed almost. And your way landed you in jail. It's
Right.
like, I mean, literally, they took you and boom, you're in jail. And they try and wipe you off, and I keep seeing this trend of if you speak against where they want it to go, they silence you whatever way they have to.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was kept in civil contempt. The statute says maximum 18 months. I'm kept in civil contempt for 7 years. They kept every 18 months they'd roll it. Unfortunately, what our legal system is, the Court of Appeals is just as corrupt as the district courts. I finally got to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ordered them, what the hell is going on? And they ordered the government to explain why I was in contempt. To get out of that, I'm suddenly released. They go back to the Supreme Court and they said, it's moot now. He's no longer there. So they don't have to answer. This is the way they manipulate shit. When the Forecaster came out, I was, I did a tour for Marcus throughout Europe. I think we were in Frankfurt. And after the film appears, then you're on stage and you do some questions and answers. And a woman stood up and she said, "This is what's wrong with America, a legal system." A German lawyer stands up. He says, "What are you talking about? We do this to people here all the time." This is the problem. When government is in charge of bringing criminal nonsense against anybody. All right. You can look at John Stuart Mills. He wrote On Liberty. And one of his quotes in there that's one of my favorite, he says, "We have yet to free ourselves from the stain of legal persecution." Again, this is human nature. It's been going on for a long time. They don't like what you say, put them on ice.
Would you say then, though, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, but like, so they silence people they don't like because they have their train of thought. This is where it's going. In human nature, if you're going to contradict, get out of the way. And so they have this
Right.
power of the government to just silence people, remove them from society. And the further you go, you got assassination attempts, you got people behind bars for, civil contempt. But what maybe they don't understand is it's almost inevitable what they're creating. And that is that certain things are going to play out, especially the harder you push one way, the inevitability of almost foregone conclusions is there.
Well, I can tell you, it was very interesting. They would never allow anybody in to see me. The New Yorker magazine, I think they published it in 2009. They did a 10-page article on me. I never saw anybody get in. And I said, they got in. I said, boy, you guys must have some real juice. And he told me, he says, we got in only by threatening Washington, D.C. He said, we can get in to see a terrorist. Why can we not get in to see Armstrong? Washington panicked. And they said, we're going to do a huge expose on Washington. They then called the Bureau of Prisons and said, let them in. Marcus was always trying to get in to see me. They would never let him in. So when I finally got out, he said he wanted to do this movie. And I said, what are you going to do? Come over and film me brushing my teeth or something? I mean, I had no anticipation or desire to go back into the industry. So I said, all right, fine. So I called a guy who used to work for me that was in the like convention type affairs. And I said, look, this guy wants to shoot a movie. I guess maybe I'll just do a small a conference. And he said to me, oh, Marty, you'll be lucky if you get 25 people show up. And he says, it's not like it used to be. I said, that's good enough, I guess, for him to film. So I said, all right, fine. I was out in September. By December 3rd, we're doing this conference for Marcus. We had over 1,000 people show up, and we had to turn away 1,000. And I was shocked. And one old friend of mine, actually from Vancouver, came down. And I asked him, and I got the same response from everybody else. And this is what they didn't understand because it applied to Trump as well. I asked him, why did you come? Because I was really surprised. And he said to me, I wanted to make sure it was really you. I said, boy, you guys, he says, look, the government could be putting out something and put Martin Armstrong on it. I had to make sure it was really you. I said, boy, you guys don't really trust government at all, do you? And that's what they did to Trump. They thought, okay, fine, let's charge him. We'll do this. Nobody will vote for him. What did it do? It showed that they were so damn corrupt. And that's why I got elected. It had the opposite effect. The same thing that happened to me. Before, I was just institutional. All right. I wasn't retail. I wouldn't have been on something like this. All right. I'm in prison, and actually, to tell you the truth, what inspired me to write was basically, you're the Canadian guy who had what was his
Conrad Black.
Yeah, I forget what newspaper it was, but anyhow, they put him in Miami, and he started writing from prison. I said, that's a good idea. So I said, I want to write. And this is what comes back, they judged me by themselves. They said, all right, fine, you can write, which is First Amendment. But they said, you can't make any money. I said, I don't care. So I wrote from prison. It ends up being some huge thing. And it's because they were trying to suppress me that it made retail audiences that I didn't have before. So it had the opposite effect.
Well, that's I probably say the word wrong of inevitable, but like by them silencing and removing part of the conversation, they think they're going to get what they want.
Yeah.
And in the short term, they might get what they want, but in the long term, they're going to get something completely different.
Oh yeah, it's everybody now knows. They don't trust government like they used to. They swore, oh, discredit Trump and it becomes president. And it's and tell you how corrupt. Look, I mean, it's James Comey, who was basically, came out with the shells on the beach, killing Trump, etc. Oh, I didn't know it meant that, whatever. Who was the guy that was on my case, keeping me in prison indefinitely? James Comey. Same shit. Why? Because I refused to put in $10 billion into a regime change to take over Russia. Why did Hillary start the whole Russia nonsense? Because she thought, okay, the U.S. tried to interfere in the Russian 2000 election. It backfired. They were blackmailing Yeltsin to step down and put in their puppet, Boris Berezovsky, who then magically kills himself, supposedly, and his bodyguard said, no, he was killed by MI6. He didn't commit suicide. Everybody commits suicide, It's and so Yeltsin turned to Putin. That's how Putin got in. Because Putin wasn't a communist and he wasn't an oligarch. And Yeltsin was being attacked by those on the Clinton side and the U.S. and the bankers. And then from the communist side, they filed a motion for impeachment to try and take Russia back to USSR. So he was getting attacked from both sides. So he turned to Putin, and his last words to him was protect Russia. Look, the female who was in charge of, she was the head of the Russian Democratic Party. She was assassinated. All right. Her son happened to be working in our London office. So then that drags me into this thing that, oh, she was a puppet of a Western financier who was supposed to be me. I mean, it's like, come on, how much bullshit are you people making up about me? That I'm the one behind, trying to manipulate Russia. It wasn't me. I'm sorry. Just because her son worked for us, that didn't mean, I was advising her. I didn't even know until she was assassinated. It's a quagmire of unbelievable shit that look, this is why they're turning the Forecaster now into a Hollywood movie. It's going to be like an action film, I guess. That's like The Big Short. It just goes off the charts. All the stuff that I've seen, been in the middle of one way or another.
Martin, how old are you today?
75.
You're 75. In your 75 years, what advice would you give to people? Don't trust government? Like what is the simplest advice you
Pretty
have in your
much. I
75
mean,
years?
um, look, I've been dragged into this mainly because of currency. Um, like I said, my father took us to Europe when I was 13 for the summer. I learned about currency. We had to cross every border from, changing currency all the time, and you had to listen to the price, quinchenta milliliter, and you had to then convert that in your mind to dollars or whatever. So when Bretton Woods collapsed in 71, the currencies first started trading in futures in 72. And I happened to have a friend who was a client, Walter Zengerle, and he was an executive VP at Franklin National Bank, the first bank that went down because of foreign exchange. It was Franklin National Bank was the bank that started MasterCard. So it was a big deal. But they didn't teach this stuff in school, and they still don't. They still teach Keynesian economics and all this nonsense, which is all based on fixed exchange rates. So he said to me, he says, look, you know this, you understand currency. Would you come take a look at this? I went and looked, and I saw the bank lost a shitload of money on a 10% move in the Italian lira. Bank fails in 74. But ever after that, any foreign exchange crisis I got called into. They're forming the G5. I'm called into that. China goes into the Asian currency crisis 97. I'm the first one called into China to meet with the Bank of China over there. When they're forming the euro, I'm called in. I mean, I've been in the middle of absolutely every single event, period. So I've had a front row seat. To a large degree, that's why they were also afraid of me. They thought I just knew too much.
Or maybe they thought you were giving advice that was sound, and they couldn't have that.
Well, true. I mean, I refused to. They wanted me to put in $10 billion into this Hermitage Capital Management to take over Russia, and I refused. I said, my computer says, number one, you're going to fail. Two, Russia's going to collapse. And I stood up in June of 98. We had a conference in London, and I said that. And the London Financial Times happened to be there. They snuck in the back of the room, and they put it on the front page. Armstrong says Russia's going to collapse, and we're going to have all these nukes running around, whatever. And that was the final straw, I guess. That was it. Then they all blamed me because they lost a shitload of money, long-term capital management crisis, all that, because they were all in the same trade. Every one of them was on the same trade, and they thought they were buying these GKOs from Russia, earning, 30% interest guaranteed. So they were bribing the IMF to keep the loans going so they could make 30% annually forever. And I told them, I don't care who you have. They put on a big dinner in Washington, D.C., invited the IMF, paid for the whole thing, rented the National Gallery. Every politician was there. I was even talking to Paul Volcker at that dinner, all to show me that they had the IMF in the back pocket. And I said, I don't give a shit who you have. I advise the people the IMF has to go get money. All right. It's not going to work. But they wouldn't listen to me. It failed. And then instead of saying they were wrong, this is the same bullshit with government. Instead of saying they were wrong, it's my fault. It went down because I said so. Instead of what you were doing was wrong. There, you had every major fund, all the bankers, they're all long these GKOs. Something happens. You are the market. Who are you going to sell to? There's nobody else. You suddenly try to sell, there's no market. So then what happens? They start liquidating stuff everywhere else to raise money to cover their losses. So the yen's going down, the stock market's going down because they're selling. It's a liquidity crisis because they lost money in Russia. They weren't selling the stock market because they thought it was going to go down. It was to raise money to cover the losses in Russia. But I get blamed for it.
Curious. We've talked a lot about 2032. How far does the model go into the future? Can you look exponent, in the next 100 years, or is it
Yeah,
decade
no,
by
I
decade?
can look well beyond that. It's
What does it say after 2032? It was Rebecca Koffler saying that Putin is in until 2036 at least. When you look past 2032, what do you see?
I don't think it'll make it that long, but
You don't think Putin will make it that long?
no. But look, this is kind of like the revolution against monarchy, and it happens more than you think. Uh, you had Rome overthrow its king in 509 BC, and a few months later, Athens, overthrows its tyrants and creates, democracy. You had the American Revolution against, monarchy. Oh, that's a good idea. Okay, 1789, George Washington's getting sworn in. What happens? Oh, France goes, oh, we should do the same. French Revolution. These things become contagions. You had 1848, big communist revolution that swept all of Europe, um, overthrew the monarchy again in France. We go through these things routinely, mainly because government will not listen. They have the power. They think they can use that power and retain it forever. All right. So that's the whole problem. And so what the computer is showing, what 2032 is about, is the end of republics. Period. All right. Everybody's going to say this form of government, it sucks. Okay. You have no right to vote for, did you really pick Carney? They picked Carney. We're sticking him in as the liberal. You have no right. Look at Ursula in the head of the EU. She's never stood for an election. This is democracy. Talk to people from Vietnam. 18. You're old enough to hold a gun and go kill somebody. You were too young to have a drink. No less vote. That was all 21. But you can go kill somebody at 18. But you have no right to vote, so this is democracy. This is the bullshit, really, that we are facing. And people they're beginning to rise up. Look, Trump was a watershed event. When he was elected, it's a contagion. Look at Europe. All of a sudden, AfD, oh, they're a bunch of Nazis, this minor thing, tried to kick them off of everything. Now they're number one party. You have Nigel Farage, Reform Party, number one in Britain. Why? Look, these people have brought in these migrants without any understanding of history whatsoever. The most dramatic example is the Roman Emperor Valerian, or I think around 364 AD. All right. Attila the Hun is coming. So he lets all the Goths in, which are German tribes. He lets them come in, thinking that he's going to be able to use them to build up an army against Attila the Hun. Trains them. They now all learn Roman tactics. Very nice. What did they do? Let's take this son of a bitch out. Stage the battle. the emperor is killed in the battle and beheaded. Okay, by the migrants he let in. This is 1844. We're in a steep recession, sovereign debt default by states in the 1840s after the Panic of 1837. This is when the Irish are coming. Potato famine, all this turns into gun battles on the streets of Philadelphia. Why? Because these migrants are coming in. They have nothing. They're willing to work for less money than a native. And they even call it the native movement. You're seeing the same thing in Europe again. You cannot bring in migrants at the same time you have an economic decline. Period. Just look at history. It will always end up in the same issue. You got civil unrest. Look at California. And you get Newsom going, oh, they're tax-paying people. And really? I cannot hire somebody. I have to have who they are. I have to take out the taxes. They have to have a social security number. All these people, what are they? They're getting welfare from California for free. They can't have a job, a legitimate job, so they got to be working for cash underneath the table. And now they're torching the city, and you have Newsom supporting them against tax-paying Americans. Just look at, you have all these Democratic governors supporting the people torching the city. Why? Because they've lost their minds. If Trump says the sky's blue, it can't be blue, it has to be red. Whatever Trump says, they must do the opposite. Whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, doesn't matter. This is the problem. We've gotten so polarized in politics that you're seeing the same thing in Germany, you're seeing it everywhere, that it's polarizing the countries. You're going to see civil unrest, not just in the United States and eventually in Canada too, but throughout Europe. I mean, most of the major cities in Europe are on the verge of civil wars. The people, it's worse there than it is here in North America because the migrants that came in were Islamic. They didn't come to assimilate. They've stuck up signs in Sweden, Sharia law here. They're bringing their culture. No, this country's got to change to ours. They didn't come to, oh, gee, I want to be Swedish. No, that's not, when everybody came from Europe here, they came for a better life, to get away from what was over there. I was in Berlin, and I asked, gee, where's all the migrants? Oh, they get a 2-week paid vacation by the government to go back to the very places they claim they had to flee from for political reasons. And the German government was paying full paid 2-week vacation to migrants. I mean, you can't even make up this stuff.
What advice would you have then on the immigration side of things?
Look, it's the way immigration always was simply, you go to Britain, a lot of Indians there, but they're skilled. Most of them are in the health industry. They voted for Brexit. Why? Because I had to learn, I had to have a skill, and I had to have the language to get in. Mexicans here in Florida, very pissed off at all these migrants. Why? Same thing. They had to learn the language. They had to have a skill. A lot of your small businesses here are owned and run by Mexicans. They've been here for a long time. You don't just let people in with nothing. I can't get a citizenship in Zurich. The first criteria is I must be able to speak German. Second, I have to have a trade that's valuable. If I can't, sorry, not allowed in. Look, migration is fine, but you don't let in, the undesirables per se. You want people that are going to come here, expand your economy, that they want to be part of what you are, not change you to what they're leaving from.
Martin, I appreciate you hopping on and giving me so much time this morning. And it's never dull with you, that is for sure. And I look forward to the next time we have you on. But appreciate it, and well, we'll pay attention to everything coming out of your end of the internet, out of everything, all the conversations and articles you've been writing. I think I can speak for my audience in saying we appreciate it immensely.
Well, I figured, look, we're all in this together. I can't beat my computer. I've tried many times. So the best thing to do is at least, all right, fine, understand it. I see it more as like the biblical story of Joseph advising the Pharaoh. There's going to be 7 years of plenty, so stock up. And then there's going to be 7 years of drought. If you at least listen, you understand there's a cycle. When the drought comes, it's not so bad. You're prepared. Simple as that.
Martin Armstrong, everyone, thanks again.
Well, thank you. I hope you do what I say. Eliminate income tax up there. I might even open up myself.
There you go, Alberta. If you separate, you're gonna have Martin Armstrong up here.
No
Thanks,
income
Martin.
tax. We have no income tax in Florida. That's why I moved here.
Makes sense to me. I think that makes sense to a ton of Albertans too.
I'll tell you, my father was a lawyer, as you know, but his law partner told me when I lived in New Jersey, if you die here, tell your family to drag your body across the river before they tell anybody. They want half of what you got while you're living, and then when you die, they want the other 40%. So, Florida, very glad I came here. Kicked myself in the butt for not coming here a lot sooner.
Thanks, Martin.
Thank you.